Hi, my name's Tom Megan. I'm responsible for international students at our school. The following is an interview with one of our former pupils to explain to parents of new students how we would care for your child if you choose to join our school. It's a long interview, which we've tried to separate into 6 different parts that will hopefully give you a better understanding of the care and support and systems we have in place to take care of your child.
What makes this school unique? Okay. Why should students and their parents choose this school over such a big choice of schools?
Yep. I mean, it must be a huge headache to find a UK school because there are many hundreds. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, I mean, you can do A-levels inside China, mm-hmm. or you could choose to go to Canada or Australia or the United States. But I mean, the studying abroad is a big headache. Mm. Okay. I suppose, aside from everything I've spoken about today, one of the biggest differences is the system we use in terms of actually caring for them outside of school. So the accommodation system. And I can't find another example in the UK of a school that does this. Okay. Most international schools in the UK are boarding schools. It's very easy for parents to imagine what it looks like. It's a boarding house or a susha, a dormitory. You have what's called a house master, who takes care of 40, 50, 60 girls. Okay. Within that house, you're going to get students from Russia, Middle East, a few British, and a lot of Chinese students, typically in a boarding school. Okay. That one teacher is interacting with 50 or 60 kids. How much attention can that one teacher give? Okay. So you have the subject teachers in school, and then you have the academic housemasters in the boarding house. That's the typical experience of boarding school. Even if they wanted to speak to most parents, and even if they could speak Chinese, they don't have time. They have too many students, number one. Number two, they do not know their students as well as I know my students. Okay, simply because, I mean, our housemasters have a ratio of 1 to 4, 1 to 5. Because we operate a system that's not a traditional accommodation system, nor is it homestay. A lot of day schools in the UK do homestay, and there are all kinds of problems with homestay. Okay, homestay families often don't understand the culture. They're not employed by the school. They don't have any direct contract with the school. They're often employed by a third company that hires the homestay family, ultimately, it's not their child. You know, they don't really have to care. So sometimes the kids don't like the food. They don't eat properly. They're playing games on their phones all the time. There's very little communication with the parents. Some homestays are amazing. Some homestays are not, and it's kind of potluck. If you get a good homestay, good. If you get a bad homestay, sorry. Okay, it's impossible to regulate and standardize the service. So what we have is a model called teacher homestay or teacher's house. Okay, the student lives in a rented kind of, I guess in Chinese you'd call it a bieshu or a mansion or a big house. There's one teacher in the house with 5 or 6 international students. Okay, that's how it works. So the teacher knows each of them much, much better. The ratio in the accommodation is 1 to 5, 1 to 6. Compared to other schools where it's 1 to 40, 1 to 50, 1 to 60. And that means we find problems early. Okay? We find problems early. Now, I say there is no perfect system for looking after teenagers who've traveled from the other side of the world. Okay? But what I will say is we rarely lose our students to other schools. In fact, I find it difficult to think of an example where we have lost one of our students to another school. We regularly get students from China who've transferred from other schools to us. Okay? Most of the problems of the other schools were nothing to do with the maths teacher or the science teacher. The problems were in accommodation. The problems were within the accommodation. There were problems between students, but nobody solved the problems. Or there was a personal problem for the student that they couldn't cope and nobody was helping. But when we have a ratio of 1 to 5, 1 to 6, we find the problems earlier, and I will relate it to the parents myself if there's an issue. And then we spend a lot of time one-to-one with each student, finding out, if we have one-to-one a meeting about how to apply for university, then we also have one-to-ones about, how's it going? Is everything okay? And constantly reminding the students, tell me if something's wrong. I won't ignore it. I won't pretend I didn't hear it. Tell me what's wrong and we will deal with it. Okay? There are always problems with young people at this age, with this number of hormones, age 15, 16, 17, being sent to the other side of the world. It would be a complete lie for me to say that it's always smooth when you're dealing with young people. There are issues between parents and kids sometimes. There are. It's lots of different families, lots of different personalities. Kids who are sometimes a little bit spoiled, a little bit arrogant, who we need to try and advise and guide and lead. There are numerous problems that come from doing this job, but it also makes it a wonderful job because every day we're dealing with something very, very different. Okay, so constant communication and being able to find problems early, I guess, is what, because of our system of accommodation, that makes us, I think, very strong compared to the traditional international schools.
You mentioned having less Chinese students here compared to other schools. And I think as a whole, the school has significantly less students in general. What are some of the advantages of having a small number of international students in school and even in their accommodation?
Well, again, it's, this school is a majority British school. Okay, so it's an authentically English school. It's not an international school. If it had 0 Chinese students, it would still be here. Okay. Now, I often say to Chinese parents, especially ones who are transferring to us from other schools, the litmus test on a good school is, if it had no international students or had no Chinese students, would the school survive? Well, this school would survive if it had no Chinese students. And therefore, the incentive is to get Chinese students that are limited. It's beneficial for the Chinese students and it's beneficial for the British students as well. Okay, that we don't allow the school to turn into a ghetto, so to speak, of one particular nationality. Okay, even though I spoke about it before, they're inclined to group together, they always are. Okay, so limiting the number of students will help integration, and it also allows us to deliver a better service because there's more teachers for fewer students. So my job is, aside from teaching a little bit of Chinese, my job is the international students. They are my job. I deal with them, I deal with their parents, and that's it. And then beneath me are the guardian housemasters who also take care of the students. So there's a huge infrastructure of care around them. That won't work if we had 100. It just won't work.
With, well, I guess a small number of students, of Chinese students, should we say, maybe often there are even more issues arise between the students because they've got less people to make friends with or group with.
Sure.
Have you had any of these problems with students that have come to this school, and how have you dealt with them?
In many ways, we assume the role of parents. Okay, or the Latin is in loco parente, okay, which is in place of the parents. Now, you don't want to overparent problems because these are 16-year-olds. We have 2 years, normally 2 years, to get them ready to get to university where they are completely alone and nobody's watching them. But nevertheless, they are, and I'm acutely aware that they are our kids and that we've got a parental responsibility to them. Now, in the last 10 years, but particularly the last 5 years, there have been new issues. Okay, cyberbullying would be one of those new issues. Okay, and what I mean by that is that to some extent we've got a crisis. It's manifesting itself in boys and girls very differently. So a lot of what was making comparisons with others is done online. A lot of these kids have grown up with the technology, and kind of grown with a presence online, whereas perhaps you and I didn't have that. We just missed that in terms of our generation. But this generation, from age 8, 9, 10, had smartphones and were exposed to the perfect world of everybody else. Because I think young people find it difficult when they look at somebody else's profile on, it might be Facebook, but it also might be WeChat. They look at somebody else's life on WeChat Moments, and it looks absolutely perfect. It looks like everyone else has everything sorted out. Of course, they don't. Nobody knows what they're doing, and they don't have the answer for anything. And all of these young people are in some kind of a crisis. But it looks worse when you see everybody else in seemingly a perfect situation. There's also more and more psychological studies to suggest that technology is releasing dopamines in young people. It's the same as when you receive a text message, you get an urge to want it. Yeah, it's the same dopamines, the same hormones are released through this constant communication with social media, the same hormones that are released in gamblers, in alcoholics. But of course, these are very, very young people who aren't equipped and ready to it. It's manifesting itself in a new wave of very, very low self-esteem young people. Okay, this is not only Chinese students at all, it's British students as well. So we get constant training as teachers in how to deal with this, but I very specifically, because I understand my job is in school, but also out as parent, to watch our Chinese students and what they're going through. So very, very low self-esteem. And a lot of them tell me when we deeply talk about these problems is they find it difficult to make meaningful relationships with others. They find it difficult to make meaningful friendships with others. Okay, so these two problems are manifesting themselves in young people, and the technology is hyping it. Okay, I think low self-esteem is a tragedy. I've seen students who are a very handsome guy, a very smart guy, a very hardworking guy who thinks of himself as ugly, stupid, and useless. Okay, and from a very good family in China, and it's incredible how serious the problem is. The only thing I would say to parents is that we are well aware of these kinds of issues with young people, and we don't just ignore them. So this goes well beyond what I guess our job should be. Our job should be to feed them, house them, make sure they're safe, and make sure they're doing their homework. But I've always seen it's far, far more than that. With girls, the problems in recent years has been an increase in self-harm. Now, I say that it cuts across cultures, it cuts across economic class, rich houses, poor houses, in China and in the UK alike. This is an issue. It's still very rare, but it's important for parents to know that it continues to grow, and it can happen in boys as well. Okay, so on school there is a trusted, highly qualified psychologist, okay, who offers students one-to-one sessions. We are acutely aware that there are issues with students from anywhere. When you add the stress of moving a young person from China all the way to the UK, especially when their image is everything's going to be amazing. People always think they get very, very excited about studying abroad, and then there's an anticlimax. So I try to advise students to not think the UK is some kind of paradise on earth. It's not a perfect place. and for parents to understand that problems will happen. And this includes students with very, very good grades. Okay? Students with really good grades going to really, really good universities from very good families, okay, also have these exact same problems. It's not simply a case of not studying well, so they react emotionally. It's just not that issue. You then mix in social media, cyberbullying, and all this technology, and you've got a hot pot of new problems for this decade. But it's important for parents to know that we're on it and we don't just ignore it. I mean, the school has a strict, very strict anti-bullying policy, but it also has an ethos that this is a family that takes care of each other, including in very, very difficult times. And since you're a former pupil, you probably know that yourself.
Yes, I do. I'm very experienced with that. In my opinion, I feel that psychological problems, depression, 心理问题, it's in China, especially in the older generation, there's a bit of a stigma around
taboo.
Yeah, that it doesn't exist, or they're simply misbehaving,
right,
or they just need to be shouted at more.
Okay.
Something like a lot of the older generation just don't believe that these sort of mental health issues exist.
Okay.
If you identify that a student has depression or something like that, how do you approach the parent to tell them about this?
Sure, no problem. The first thing to understand is the word 心理医生 in Chinese doesn't really cover it in the UK. We've got therapists, we've got counselors, we've got psychologists, and we've got psychiatrists. Most of it, 99% of the problems, can be dealt with by therapists or counselors, which is simply someone to talk to. So in the UK, it's not really considered an embarrassing thing to talk about your problems. It was, but it's getting better and better. Okay, so we are constantly talking to our students about their emotion and how they're doing, because it does lead to performance as well. I mean, particularly low self-esteem. I don't think many of them get into the depression route or the self-harm route. I mean, it happens, but the main one, I'm finding it, since I deal with boys more, that low self-esteem and a struggle to make meaningful friendships are the two big issues with young people. And the only reason we're talking about is to make parents understand that we're very much aware of these issues and we care enough to openly confront them, and for parents to understand that no, there are no perfect parents, there are no perfect teachers, and there are no perfect students. Talking about your problems and dealing with your problems, as small and as trivial as people may think they are, can stop them from becoming more and more serious. Now, let me give some examples of problems. Okay, so one boy comes to mind who comes across as extremely arrogant and overconfident. I could have just let that go. I could see that he unnecessarily alienated himself. In fact, he kind of made others uncomfortable or was more confrontational with, but there was no need to do it. I mean, sometimes you have to behave like that in order to get things done. Maybe a boss has to be unpopular with his workers. Maybe a teacher has to be unpopular with his students. But other than that, you should learn, and it's our responsibility as a school to teach social skills, human interaction skills. But we could simply say, it's not really a problem. It's a problem between the Chinese students. I don't need to talk to him about that. But no, what I do is I'll take him out of school, out of the environment, and we'd probably go and grab a burger, okay? And we do it on a one-to-one level, and we talk about it very openly and very honestly. And we'll see how he reacts. Sometimes they react very positively. Sometimes they resist. I don't think it's a problem for me to have that kind of relationship with the students. It's normally a female teacher who deals with girls on that level, but with boys, I'm very happy to have if necessary, a confrontational, but kind of a friendship / parent / teacher relationship with them. I understand that they've just traveled thousands of miles, left a very different culture to come to this country. And sometimes they need a friend, sometimes they need a teacher, sometimes they need a parent. But I'm saying this to reassure parents that we do care and that we deal with even these kinds of problems that I think many schools simply won't or don't have the resources to, or simply have too many students to be able to deal with them. Okay, so that was one example of a student who needed to be confronted, and as a consequence is doing better, and hopefully when he gets to university he'll do even better still. He'll reassess the way he deals and interacts with other people.
Do you ever find that some students are reluctant or even embarrassed to talk about their problems, whether it be mentally or family issues? Perhaps they're struggling to communicate with their parents. In China, there's a big saying that you don't talk about your family issues to other people, like 家丑不能外传.
Okay.
Do you have students that feel reserved about talking about something?
And these are British ones as well. I mean that what you just said there in terms of Chinese culture isn't that dissimilar from British culture, except the distinction when you say the word "go," talk about your problems. First of all, it's entirely confidential. It's illegal for that teacher to tell anyone, including me. Okay, even though I could be legally speaking their parent while our students are in the UK. So the confidentiality is there, and likewise, we won't push where there's no need to push. I like it to come naturally from a student if they feel they want to approach us, and that they know that we're here if they need as well. And if I spot something in the interactions between them, or a teacher spots something and reports it to me, I'll ask parents directly. I mean, it's a British culture thing. We'll tell them directly. They tend to know me quite well even before the child has started. I've spoken to the parents and the students a few times. And we build a relationship there. When I go to China to recruit, if I'm in a Chinese city, I'll try and meet the families as well. Yes, it's friendship and it's care, but we know where to draw that line.
Speaking of drawing the line, there's obviously a very fine line between parenting a student and just advising or taking care of them in their general everyday life. Some parents may feel offended that you are effectively taking over their role when they're in a different country. How do you balance that? So not parenting them too much and not controlling them too much, but still be a source of advice and a source of authority.
Okay, so I mean, our approach normally with young people is, I mean, some young people have a problem controlling the use of their mobile phone.
Absolutely.
Okay, even good students. They are addicted to their technology, and part of that was the dopamines that I was talking about. So our policy is normally this: we don't want to confiscate. We don't want to treat someone like a baby, because in 2 years they're going to be in university. We don't want to treat them like a university. But if they don't hand their homework in, or they sleep in and miss a class, then we will then be strict. So it's a combination of, in English, what we call carrot and stick, giving them a certain amount of freedom. If they break our trust, we then will come down on them. We will then do what we need to do with them. Yeah. In fact, students who start here will sign with me a contract. Okay. Now, it's not a legally binding contract, but I don't say that it's not a legally binding contract with them. I tell them that it's a contract of conduct. Okay, and they make certain promises, okay? And on the other side, we make certain promises. And that promises is not that we're going to baby them or micromanage them, because there's no point in treating a young person like that, particularly if they're able to self-control. The idea is to teach them how to self-control, because if we don't, 2 years later, they are in university completely alone, okay? Nobody will care if they show up or don't show up to class in university, if they do a homework or don't do a homework. Everything we've been talking about today, going to Africa and the realization and developing as a human, and all the work experience, and all these talks and all this personal statement and CV building and everything we do here is to try and get them to be ambitious, understand why they're doing this, and why they should go to a good university and be successful, and why they should get a good career, and to self-control and be determined and get that drive as best we can within the limits, and never pretend to anyone that it's perfect, because it's never perfect.
That basically wraps up for today. Thank you for your time. You've gone into a lot of detail about what we offer as a school and the advantages we have. You've been very open and honest about any issues. I think that is it done. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thanks a lot.